Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for joining our webinar this morning. So we're very, very excited to introduce Real Life Sciences, a recent acquisition by MediSpend. We are recording this webinar, and we will be sending out the recording after this event. If you have any questions during the webinar, please do utilize the GoToWebinar question section at the top of your screen. It looks like a little box with a question mark in it. We will be handling those questions at the end of the webinar. So I'm going to pass it over to Seth, who's going to give a little bit of an introduction to RLS and who they are, and then he'll pass it to Elliot to begin the presentation. All right, go for it, Seth.
All right. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Katie. Thank you for joining this webinar. We're really excited about this acquisition. As many of you are aware, MediSpend continues to experience outstanding growth, which has led to us becoming the leader in global transparency reporting and compliant HCP engagement solutions in the market. Not only with that, we are also experiencing tremendous growth with our events management solution, given the recent shakeup in the marketplace, which is also leading to MediSpend becoming a viable option in the events and commercial compliance space, looking for a change. So with that, we feel our success on the commercial compliance side is clearly on the rise as we continue to invest in those solutions. But what we have been missing is the ability to service and support legal, compliance, and regulatory affairs teams on the clinical side of the life sciences space, which is why we are excited about the acquisition of Real Life Sciences. As I've mentioned in previous conversations with many of our clients, our mission is to be the leader in governance, risk, and compliance solutions from molecule to market. And Real Life Sciences is already doing some great things on the molecule and the clinical side of the house, which is why this is a tremendous acquisition, tremendous partnership, and we are excited about Real Life Sciences joining the MediSpend family. So with that said, I'd like to turn it over to Elliot Zimmerman, CEO of Life Sciences, to provide everyone, all of our MediSpend clients, an in-depth overview of how Real Life Sciences can help you. Thank you.
Thank you, Seth, and I appreciate the introduction as well, Katie. First of all, I'd like to say welcome to all the MediSpend customers that are online with us today. I am really excited to be part of the MediSpend family, and I think I speak for the Real Life Sciences employees as well. So as Seth mentioned, I'm going to share a bit about the business and how we might be able to help you and your teams. And we thought the best way to do that would just be to share a little bit more about clinical data anonymization, and specifically, what is clinical transparency for those that might not already be aware. And there are, on the regulatory side of your business, there are expectations from health authorities regarding the disclosure of clinical trial results. And this is often in the form of clinical summary reports and other data related to various clinical trials. So there are mandatory expected disclosures that need to occur as different milestones through the clinical trial process are achieved. And most of your organizations probably have a disclosure and transparency team, or this function may sit within medical writing sometimes, or regulatory affairs. But these are what you see here are kind of the 6 primary areas that are involved in clinical disclosure and transparency related initiatives, projects, and initiatives. So I thought it would be helpful to explain that and also share that when we say clinical transparency, what we're really referring to here is making the results of a clinical trial available, in this case, from a regulatory perspective, would be public. And there are different health authority agencies that have policies and regulations around this, and I'm going to get into that in just a moment. So Real Life Sciences, now a MediSpend company, fills the need of pharma manufacturers like yourselves throughout the clinical research process. And this is mostly pertaining to the human-led clinical trial process, phase 1 through 3. And what you see here in the purple is some of those regulations and policies that are driving these expectations from regulators. So in Europe, the European Medicines Agency, I'll refer to it as EMA here, they have an expectation with respect to the clinical trial regulation to disclose publicly various clinical trial application documents. This means that confidential information that's proprietary IP for the organization needs to be protected and redacted before these documents are disclosed publicly. Similarly, there might be some personal data that needs to be protected in those documents before they are made public. The FDA has some requirements. It's referred to as Final Rule 801, relating to the clinical trial protocol being made public, as well as the statistical analysis plan. And then in Europe and Canada, upon authorization of a new treatment or therapy or a substantial modification, there are expectations around disclosure of the trial results as well. And these can be substantial projects in terms of anonymizing and protecting all that personal data as it relates to all the trial participants that participated. In addition, there's some additional CTR requirements around disclosure of trial results that happen at the end of a trial. So CTRs kind of involve both ends, the startup of a trial related to the application documents, and then again at the end with trial results, normally in the form of clinical summary reports. Real Life Sciences also has a few partnerships for adjacent areas that clinical and regulatory teams may need support with, such as trial registration through our partnership with Sightline. They have a software solution to assist with registration in hundreds of countries around the world where you may be performing clinical trials, and Clarity Docs with authoring of regulatory documents and disclosure-related documents that are necessary throughout the process as well. This gives you a view of a deeper dive into some of those regulations and policies. There are also different ways of protecting the personal data within these documents, known as either quantitative or qualitative anonymization techniques. There are some options for some of these policies. Health authorities generally have a strong preference towards the quantitative method, which is applying a statistical analysis of the participant data for that particular trial to make decisions that make sense to protect the identities or to protect the privacy of those participants while trying to maximize and leverage as much of the value, making the data as valuable as possible from a disclosure perspective. So we refer to that as clinical utility of the data. So this gives you a view of the different policies that your regulatory teams are dealing with, and some of the tactics that are used to deliver on these transparency requirements throughout the clinical process. I did want to also call out on the far right, there's another non-regulatory component to clinical transparency, and we refer to this as voluntary sharing of clinical trial results. This is something that not all, but many pharma participate in on a voluntary basis to anonymize their clinical trial data in the form of the data sets collected during the trial, anonymizing that data to protect the privacy, but then sharing it on an on-request and approved basis with various researchers, such as academic researchers or perhaps even partners on a commercial basis, so that the future research, subsequent research, or what's known as secondary research can be leveraged. This data can be leveraged to support that and accelerate future research by being able to learn from previous trial results in a similar indication or therapeutic area. So this is something that is growing in the industry that many pharma are participating in, and some of your organizations are as well. So as I mentioned, there's really two themes here. We're trying to balance when we anonymize data to share it, whether it be public or on a voluntary basis under the terms of a contract with a partner. There's two things we're trying to balance. One is, how do I protect the participant data to minimize and mitigate the risk of re-identification of that individual? And on the other hand, I want to maximize as much data utility as possible so the reader, the consumer of the information, understands really what happened in the trial. So when you're reading, for example, a patient narrative that took place, that summarizes what took place, how a patient was affected by the therapy, what perhaps adverse events took place, these narratives are written in the form of a clinical summary report. And what we're trying to do here, and what the aim of the pharma manufacturer is doing, is how do I make sure that since this information may become public, I'm protecting the identity and the privacy of that individual, but at the same time making this information useful so that who is consuming it understands what really was going on. I'm going to get into an example of that in just a moment. How we do that is using the RLS Protect system. So a little background for you on our application, and we also offer services for some of our customers as well. So some use the software, some prefer to have us basically deliver this to them as an outsourced service. There's three modules that support this function of clinical data anonymization and transparency. First is performing risk assessments on the clinical trial data. And what this does is it allows our system to apply different anonymization rules and techniques to the data to determine statistically what should be anonymized, what can be disclosed, and what might need to be redacted. And that's trial specific, patient population specific, dynamic analysis based on the specific characteristics of that trial. Those results then are applied into the clinical summary reports, protocol, other documents that need to be made public. Realizing that when medical writing teams are authoring these documents that are required as part of the authorization submission, they're also referring to that clinical trial data that was collected throughout the life cycle of the trial. So now what we're doing is taking the risk assessment results and the recommended anonymization techniques and applying those into the document narratives and the tables, listings, and forms. SIM is a module that we're currently building and planning to release later this year, which will allow manufacturers to identify and protect confidential information. So think of this as your proprietary IP within the business that is important to protect, because if that information becomes public, it could undermine the financial well-being of the business, especially if any of your competitors were to be able to read that information. So this capability is going to assist pharma manufacturers in identifying, tracking, approving, and then ultimately redacting that confidential information that may be found in these documents before they're made public. So this is an example I wanted to spend a moment on. I hope this will help put the pieces of the puzzle together in terms of what I've been sharing with you this morning. So think of clinical transparency as a three-step process. Step one being we're going to analyze the clinical trial data sets to determine what anonymization rules should be followed. And this allows us to stay within the boundaries or govern within a risk of re-identification that we feel is acceptable. So in this example, we're saying, instead of disclosing a participant's actual age in the narrative, we're going to transpose that into what we refer to as an age band. And commonly you might see in these anonymized documents, instead of a 35-year-old female, you may see a 30 to 39, 30-39 year age band. And now we've generalized the data to an extent so that we're helping to protect the privacy of the individual, but we're also retaining usefulness of the data, because now a secondary researcher or a consumer of this information generally does still know the age of the participant to a certain degree of accuracy. Similarly, with body mass index, there's a scale, a generally accepted scale for body mass index. So we may take the actual body mass index that was collected during the study and transpose that into a range. Similarly, with height, the system will help us identify that we can apply intervals of 5, could be centimeters, for example, to the actual height of the participant. Race may be generalized. Country may be suppressed entirely, because if we give up the person's location, that may really help an adversary if somebody were to get their hands on this information, try to connect it with other data that's available. The location information may be too telling. And so statistically, it makes sense in this example to suppress that data so that the reader does not know the country or the specific region of the world where this individual participated in the trial and probably lives. And then lastly, in this example, we're going to retain the gender. So what you see in step 2, those are examples of anonymization rules, applying age bands, generalizing, using scales. One example that we did not put in here is dates. We can offset dates so that for a participant, every visit that they had during the trial might be offset by a randomized number of, say, 112 days. And then all of the visit dates throughout all the narratives and all the data in the trial that's being disclosed, that individual will have their dates offset by 112 days consistently throughout. Now we're retaining the integrity of the data, for secondary research purposes, but we're protecting privacy. So in step 2, what you see is an example narrative of how this information is going to get transposed and generalized. So what you see in the blue is the original value in the middle. This is the actual narrative. By the way, this is, of course, just a sample. This is not actually from a real trial narrative within a CSR. And then in step 3, we take the results from the risk assessment and the statistical analysis, and we're applying those rules into the actual narrative. And the system is going to help transpose and systematically reflow the text. Even if the number of characters and digits is different, you see it looks like an original document. We've pseudonymized the subject ID. We've applied an age band, right? We have generalized, actually, we've retained the sex of the individual and the race. And in this case, we've generalized the country. We have not indicated the actual country, but we've generalized it to just say country. And then we've applied a range to the height of the individual, and we've applied the bands to the BMI. So you can see in some cases we've generalized, in some cases we've retained, and in other cases we've applied ranges. So we're protecting privacy, but there's still a lot of usefulness in this data for the consumer. From a product strategy perspective, we have a very sophisticated system to help automate this whole process. And the 4 key drivers on our product strategy are, first of all, to help you as manufacturers to comply with these regulations. So as regulations evolve and change, we enhance our product. Secondly, we always are adding and enhancing new capabilities to protect the privacy. So there's different anonymization techniques that can be used, risk threshold, adversary analysis that's automated and built out into the system itself so that you can make quick decisions around how you want to protect this data and feel confident in doing so. End-to-end lifecycle, we now have some capabilities that we've built in the last 6 to 12 months around adding on and extending the capabilities to include project management. So now you can designate resources and tasks, get alerts around when things are pending or late in the system that need to be done in order to meet these regulatory timelines for these submissions. And then lastly, automation and efficiency. We do leverage some machine learning and natural language processing to help with identifying information in some of these unstructured PDF documents. When data sets might not be available for a trial, we have some automated capabilities to create data sets from the content and the narratives in the documents. So we've come across a lot of different use cases over the years. Sometimes, for example, when an asset might be acquired, the documents, the CSRs might be acquired with the business, but for whatever reason, the data sets aren't available. In this case, we can create data sets from the documents and the narratives themselves pretty systematically to do that. So that's a little bit about our product strategy. Experience-wise, I mentioned earlier, RLS as a business, we have plenty of customers that are using our software on a day-to-day basis to fulfill these regulatory submission requirements around transparency and remain compliant. However, we also have some customers that prefer that we do this work for them. So we call that a tech-enabled service or a managed service where we're using our technology. We have an entire dedicated team of people that deliver these projects every day. We know the regulations and the guidance set forth by EMA, for example, in Health Canada and the FDA, very, I'll say inside and out, because we've done this numerous times. Over time, we have anonymized literally millions of pages of these types of clinical documents and thousands of these data sets. So if you're looking for help on a project-by-project basis, of course, we can assist with that. But if you're looking for technology to help with redaction of these documents, anonymization of these documents, whether that's for CTR regulation or Policy 70 or Health Canada PRCI, our software is purpose-built to help support these types of projects. These are some of the projects that we've helped support with our customers, and these are now publications. These are actual public disclosed information. These are hyperlinked, so if you're curious to take a look at some of the results and what these look like after the fact in an anonymized form, you can click on any of these and it'll take you into the regulator's website so you can take a look at them. And you'll see here a variety of different types of projects ranging from vaccine trials to rare disease type trials as well. So different sizes, different scale, different therapeutic areas. We've kind of seen it all. and seeing the different variances of everything in between as well. From a business perspective, now we're part of the MediSpend family, and we're really excited about that. Our headquarters office, which is where I am, is outside of Philadelphia, and we also have a subsidiary business in the Philippines as well. We do service Europe through both offices. We've got staff that serve and work European hours just as much as North America and Asia Pac as well. So that was my presentation. I know I covered a lot, but wanted to pause there. And Katie, I'll pass it back to you for some audience questions, and happy to do my best to address them.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Elliot. So I know this is sort of MediSpend's customers' first introduction to RLS and what they do. We did include a handout in the handout section with more information on RLS, what they do, how their product works, all of that. But let's jump into some questions. We do absolutely have some. Okay, so first off, what's the typical point of contact in a clinical or regulatory team that's responsible for managing these types of submissions?
Sure. So it's not a one size fits all. I will say our points of contact that we're commonly working with usually will fall into regulatory and regulatory affairs organizations, sometimes directly within medical writing. And some organizations actually have their own disclosure and transparency teams within the clinical organization. And I think some of that might depend on size and scale. How many authorizations per year are they seeking? Basically, what I mean is, what kind of volume of these types of projects do they have? And often it's also combined with teams that are responsible for registration of the trials, throughout all the dozens of different trial registries around the world.
Awesome. Thanks, Elliot.
Mm-hmm.
Another question here. What are the key milestones in a trial which trigger the submission?
Good question. So I'll answer that in a few ways. So first of all, for the CTR in Europe, some of you might be familiar with the Clinical Trial Information System, CTIS, which is now being used for all trial, startup of all trials in Europe in a centralized fashion. So the CTA documents, it's basically whenever CTA documents are submitted, the public versions of those documents need to be submitted at the same time. So we're talking about at the very start, getting ready to ramp up a trial. For Health Canada's public release of clinical information policy, that is triggered, the submission, the disclosure submission that we're talking about here, that's triggered by the notice of compliance. So that is typically anticipated in advance, and the manufacturer knows when that's coming. And then there's 60 days from the notice of compliance for that authorization. There's 60-day time period to submit these anonymized documents. And then lastly, for EMA Policy 70, so now we're talking Europe, it's similar to Canada, but slightly different. This is based on the CHMP opinion. So this is the committee that serves the opinion of whether to authorize or not authorize. And from that opinion date, the manufacturer has 30 days to submit the package. So there's a bit of variance there, but the policies are quite similar in scope. The timelines are slightly different between Canada and Europe.
Great, thank you. So I know you touched on this for sure. How much time are trial sponsors given to complete the regulatory disclosure submissions?
So the triggering date, like I mentioned, might be the NOC, the Notice of Compliance, or the CHMP opinion. However, those dates are well anticipated. So what we find is our customers are starting this work several months in advance of those key trigger dates. So typically these projects, depending on the size and scale, they may run anywhere from 2 months to 4 months long, sometimes a little bit longer if they're significant in size. But the actual trigger dates are those NOC, the Notice of Compliance, and CHMP opinion. But we'd recommend starting early, especially if it's the organization's first time going through the process. Getting started early just gives you, a bit more flexibility as you learn through the process, and we will guide you. We guide our customers through that process to make sure they're clear on the expectations, the guidance that's provided by the health authority, and really just working through the process.
That makes sense. I know something we're always recommending for our customers on the aggregate spend transparency side. Always start early. Start early is
Yeah.
always better. All right, we do have another question here. If the authorization request is withdrawn from the authority, is the disclosure submission to Health Canada or another regulatory still required?
It is, yes. Good question. So obviously, this whole process gets started. You run your clinical trial, and you may submit for authorization, but at some point the organization may learn something in the trial results and the data analysis itself that says, what, maybe this drug doesn't have the efficacy we expected, or there's some conditions or adverse events that we need to pay more attention to, in which case the application may be withdrawn. That's not super uncommon. You hope that it doesn't happen, but it can happen. In that case, withdrawn applications are still required to disclose these results. So these transparency requirements still do apply.
Okay, and okay, so if my company prefers to outsource this type of work, if we don't have the internal resources, instead of using your software, is that an option?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think I'll mention again that we have kind of two. You can almost think of it as like two parts to our business. We have the software capability that we can deploy and make available for you. We train you how to use it so that you can be kind of self-servant as your projects come up and you need to get this work done. The alternative is we can provide this as a service. So in this case, we're using our own tech, but we have a services team that we dedicate to you for that project lifecycle, if you will, for those couple months. And we work on that project on your behalf. We guide you through it. We make sure you're aware of the key decisions, the implications of those decisions. We'll make recommendations based on our experience. There's some regulator discussions as well, like EMA offers what's called a pre-submission meeting at the beginning of your project that you can take advantage of, and we're more than happy to participate in that with you. I would recommend that if this is your first time going through the process, it's a good thing to take advantage of. So absolutely, we can guide you through that. We can deliver the work. And I suppose there also can be, a hybrid of the two where you might be using the software for certain types of projects. And we have this situation where some of our customers prefer to use the software on the CTR related documents that are mostly redaction and protection of confidential information. But for these, I'll call them bigger, somewhat more complex Policy 70 projects, for example, in Europe, they may ask us to do those projects on their behalf as a service.
Awesome. Let's see. So we have one more question here. Why do manufacturers share this anonymized trial data?
Yeah, good question. So on the regulatory side, it's a requirement, right? Through these policies and regulations that I've been discussing. I think the question might be on the data sharing side, on the voluntary data sharing side. Why do manufacturers do this? It's a very fair question. First of all, not all do. I think that many do, by the way, but some don't, and some of that might also come down to size and just resource capacity, et cetera. But there's definitely a trend in the industry. More and more manufacturers are sharing trial results, and what that means is they're anonymizing the trial data itself, the actual data sets from the trial, and on request making that information available for purposes of secondary research. The whole idea here is to advance research, to accelerate research. And by putting that data in the hands of, say, an academic researcher or an organization or a partner that's looking to extend and learn from the research that you've already completed, whether it was a successful trial or a failed trial, there's still value in that data in terms of helping to accelerate another trial in a similar indication and therapeutic area. That's the real goal here, and is that as more and more organizations are sharing that data, we can all learn from each other and accelerate the next set of research. So that's really the goal. That said, that data may not be made public. In fact, often it's not made public, but it is anonymized and shared on request, often under the terms of a contract, in terms of how it will be used, how long it'll be used, whose hands will it be in, how will the data be destroyed when it's complete, when the research is complete. So there's a lot of contractual obligations that are put around it to protect that data. It's still anonymized, but then these other forms of governance are put around it to make sure that data is protected at all times. Hope that answers the question.
I'm sure it does. There's been a lot of information shared today, I'm sure. We have one more question here, and it's just how would they learn more about real life
Yeah.
sciences? Yeah, and I will only say that there is a handout, obviously, in the GoToWebinar platform, so that's always a good place to go. But Elliot, let us know.
Yeah. So a couple of ideas on that. One is, go to rlsciences.com. That's our website. You can find a ton of information. We have recorded webinars out there. We have a blog, downloadable materials. There's a lot of information there. And then I would say, reach out to Katie or Seth, and let us help you. If we can spend a few minutes with you on the phone, and I'm happy to do that personally, we can help address your questions, help you navigate to get the information that you need.
Awesome. Well, that concludes all of the questions. Elliot, thank you so much for taking the time and
Yeah.
introducing our customers to real life sciences. Definitely more information to come for sure.
Yeah. Thanks for having me. It's great to meet everybody today. Hope that was helpful and look forward to seeing you in the future as well.
Terrific. And like I said, a recording of this webinar will be sent out to everybody. So looking forward to seeing you guys on the next event. Bye, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.